75 million albums, the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an MTV.com expert panel ranked them the greatest metal band of all time. In 1965, a 17-year-old named Tony Iommi was standing at a machine in a Birmingham sheet metal factory when the blade came down. It took the tips of 2 fingers on his right hand, his fretting hand. He plays guitar left-handed. At the hospital, a doctor looked at what remained and delivered the verdict. In interview after interview across the decades, Iommi recalled the same basic message from the doctors and specialists he saw. He might as well give up. He was never going to play guitar again. Pack up. The career that had barely started was being filed away by a man with a medical degree in a Birmingham hospital on an ordinary afternoon in 1965. Tony Iommi went home. He sat with that verdict, and then he did something that the doctor, the critics, and eventually the entire music establishment had not factored into their calculations. He refused to accept it. What he built with 2 missing fingertips didn't save his career. It created an entirely new kind of music. This is how heavy metal was invented. Tony Iommi was born in Birmingham, England, in February 1948, the son of Italian immigrants who had settled in Aston, a working-class district in the north of the city, built around factories and terraced houses, the kind of neighborhood where the sound of industrial machinery was just the background noise of daily life. His father played accordion. Music was part of the household in a way that left a mark on the son. From early in his teenage years, Iommi was serious about the guitar in a specific and productive way. He practiced. He found bands. He moved through the local Birmingham circuit with the focus of someone who had made a private decision that this was what he was doing with his life. Early bands, including the Birds and Bees, then the Rest, where he first played alongside a drummer named Bill Ward, and eventually Mythology, a band with genuine potential that was beginning to attract real attention beyond the local scene. What no one knew yet was that the 4 musicians who would eventually define an entirely new form of music were all living within walking distance of each other in Aston. Ozzy Osbourne attended the same school as Iommi, Birchfield Rhodes School in Handsworth, 1 year behind him. Geezer Butler was nearby. Bill Ward was nearby. They were all in their late teens, circling the same local music scene without yet having found their way into each other's orbit. Mythology disbanded in 1968. With the band gone and prospects suddenly unclear, Iommi and Bill Ward started looking for the next lineup, the one that would eventually bring them together with Ozzy Osbourne and Geezer Butler. But the decision that would determine everything had not happened in 1968. It had happened in 1965, 3 years earlier, on a morning when Iommi had not expected to be at the factory at all. A touring band had offered him a spot. He had said yes. He had planned to skip his final factory shift and take the first concrete step toward the career he had been working toward since he was a teenager. His mother saw it differently. Finish the shift, collect the final paycheck, leave properly. He listened. He was 17 years old. He went back to the factory, and that decision, on an ordinary morning in 1965, was about to cost him more than either of them could have imagined. The machine Tony Iommi was operating was a guillotine press, an industrial cutting tool designed to bring a heavy blade down with enough force to slice through sheet metal. There was nothing unusual about the machine. There was nothing unusual about the morning. He was finishing a shift he had not planned to work, on a day he had expected to be somewhere else entirely. At some point during that final shift, the blade came down. He pulled his right hand back. He was not fast enough. The tips of the middle finger and ring finger of his right hand were severed. He plays guitar left-handed, which means his right hand is his fretting hand, the hand that moves along the neck, shapes every chord, and determines every note a guitarist produces. Those 2 fingers, the ones that bore the damage, were the fingers that would have stopped every string. At the hospital, the damage was examined and the verdict was delivered. He would never play. He might as well pack up. Most 17-year-olds would have accepted that. The medical authority had spoken. The physical reality was undeniable. The sensation in the fingertips was gone. The ability to press cleanly against a string was gone. The control a guitarist develops over years, the exact calibrated pressure that separates a clean note from a buzz, built up through thousands of hours of practice, depended on feeling that would never return to those particular fingers. For a time, Iommi sat with it. Not passively, he tried. He picked up the guitar and attempted to play the things he had always played. What he found was that the attempt confirmed exactly what the doctor had said. The fingers refused to cooperate. The notes buzzed where they should have rung. The chords collapsed where they should have held. This is the part of the story that doesn't get told, not the accident, the weeks after it. A 17-year-old from a working-class Birmingham neighborhood, sitting alone in a room with a guitar that no longer functioned the way it had. The guitar hadn't changed. He had, and every time he picked it up, that fact was waiting for him. A guitarist's relationship to an instrument is built on sensation, the feel of the string beneath the fingertip, the pressure required to hold a note cleanly, the muscle memory that develops across thousands of hours of repetition until the hands know what to do before the mind gives the instruction. Iommi had built all of that in his right hand, in those specific fingers. That knowledge wasn't gone. The physical capacity to use it was. He knew exactly what his hands were supposed to do and could no longer make them do it. That particular kind of failure, the gap between competence and capability, does something specific to a person. A person can absorb a great deal of bad news from a doctor in a hospital. The setting is unfamiliar. The stakes are abstract. There is still the possibility that the doctor is wrong. The same bad news, repeated back by the instrument itself, is harder to argue with. The doctor was somewhere else. The guitar was right there. What kept him picking it back up isn't fully explained in any interview. Not willpower, not confidence. Possibly something closer to stubbornness, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that just keeps showing up. The music that had been the organizing principle of his life for years was not something he had any immediate replacement for. So he kept trying. He kept failing. He was running out of reasons to believe the doctor was wrong. Then a man who had no obligation to intervene walked into the situation with a recording. He was Tony Iommi's factory foreman. His name has not been recorded in any interview or documented source. What he did is documented clearly. He played Tony Iommi a recording of Django Reinhardt. Django Reinhardt was a jazz guitarist who, as a teenager, had lost the use of two fingers in a fire. The medical consensus at the time matched Iommi's own doctor's verdict. He would never play again. Reinhardt declined that verdict. He rebuilt his guitar technique entirely around the two fingers that still functioned. He became one of the most accomplished jazz guitarists who ever lived. Not accomplished given the circumstances, but accomplished on any terms, measured against any guitarist who had ever played. The foreman put the recording on and left Iommi to listen to what a man had built from the ruins of what a fire had taken. What Iommi heard in Django Reinhardt's playing was not inspiration in the generic sense. It was evidence. The doctor had given him a verdict about what was possible. Reinhardt's music was a rebuttal, not an argument, not a hope, but a demonstrated fact. A man had lost two fretting fingers and built an entirely new vocabulary around what remained. The limitation had become the method. Iommi later described the turning point without embellishment. I could relate to Django Reinhardt after losing two fingers, and listening to him inspired me to play more. He started with the immediate physical problem. Two missing fingertips meant no sensation, no grip, no contact with the string at the places where contact was most critical. He needed something functional, not cosmetic, but a replacement that could actually press against a string and hold. He experimented, and most of what he tried didn't work. Too hard, and the tip couldn't flex with the movement of his hand. Too soft, and it compressed against the string instead of pressing cleanly through it. The prosthetic needed to behave like a fingertip, firm enough to fret, responsive enough to bend, grippy enough to hold, and none of the obvious materials got there on the first attempt. He eventually found what worked by going simpler. He melted down the plastic from liquid soap bottles, softening the material until it could be shaped. He molded the softened plastic around his injured fingers with a soldering iron, working and reworking until it conformed to the shape he needed. Then, he took an old leather jacket, cut it into pieces small enough to fit the plastic tips, and glued the leather to the outside. The leather provided what the plastic alone could not: grip, friction, the ability to apply pressure to a string without slipping. "I tried different materials," he described later, "and then, at the end of the day, I came up with a leather that would grip the string. It was very primitive, but it worked. Primitive, but it worked." Those 5 words describe a great deal of what Tony Iommi built in the years that followed. The prosthetic tips addressed the contact problem, but even with the leather in place, the tension of standard guitar strings created pain against the damaged tissue beneath the plastic. Iommi switched to lighter gauge strings, thinner wire, less resistance, less tension against fingers that could not take standard pressure. He experimented with live tuning adjustments too, finding that dropping the pitch reduced the strain on his hand. "It made me invent a new way of playing," he said. The full studio shift came with Master of Reality in 1971, where Sabbath pushed the tuning down to C-sharp standard. The darkness of early Sabbath was not just tuning, it was tone, riff choice, distortion, space, and the way Iommi had turned a physical limitation into a playing language. But the direction was already clear. Everything was getting heavier. All of it tracing back to a set of handmade leather fingertips built from an old jacket and some melted plastic in a bedroom in Birmingham, built to solve a problem the doctors had said couldn't be solved. In 1968, the 4 musicians who had grown up within walking distance of each other in Aston came together. Tony Iommi on guitar, playing left-handed, with leather prosthetic tips, hands rebuilt from injury. Ozzy Osbourne on vocals, 1 year behind Iommi at Birchfield Road School and a few streets away growing up. Geezer Butler on bass. Bill Ward on drums. The same Bill Ward Iommi had first played alongside in The Rest. They went through names: Polka Tulk Blues Band, then Earth, before settling in 1969 on Black Sabbath, borrowed from a Boris Karloff horror film. The name was not accidental. It announced a direction. The seed of the opening riff came from Gustav Holst's Mars, the Bringer of War. Geezer Butler later said he had been trying to play a bit of Mars in rehearsal. The next day, Iommi came in with the riff that became Black Sabbath. The interval at the center of that riff was a tritone. 2 notes, a diminished fifth apart, long treated in music theory as inherently unstable and dissonant. It had picked up a nickname across centuries of use: Diabolus in musica, the devil in music. The legend that it was literally banned by the medieval church is mostly myth, but the theory was real. The interval creates tension that refuses to resolve cleanly. It sounded wrong in exactly the right way. Through hands that had been rebuilt from injury, it sounded like nothing that had existed in rock music before. Iommi built a riff around it. That riff became the opening of a song called Black Sabbath. On February 13, 1970, Friday the 13th, the debut album was released. The critical establishment had its verdict within weeks. Lester Bangs, the most influential rock critic in the United States at the time, dismissed them as unskilled laborers. Other critics reached for the same vocabulary: crude, unmusical, without sophistication. The press had made its decision and didn't appear to be reconsidering it. The audience was not reading the reviews. The debut album reached number 8 on the UK charts and number 23 on the US Billboard 200. Without meaningful critical support, without radio endorsement, without anything resembling institutional approval, it sold 1 million copies in the United States. Word moved the way it moved in 1970. Record stores, late-night FM stations that played full album cuts at length without interruption. One person sitting another person down in a living room and saying, "Put this on. Just listen. Trust me." The critics said crude and unmusical. The audience heard something that sounded like nothing else, coming from somewhere rock music had not been before. They made their own call without asking for the music press to confirm it. Paranoid was recorded just a few months after the debut, released in September 1970. While Lester Bangs and the rest of the critical establishment were still actively dismissing Black Sabbath as beneath serious attention, it went to number 1 in the United Kingdom. In roughly a year, Black Sabbath had released 2 albums, been called unskilled laborers by one of the most influential rock critics in America, reached the top of the UK charts, and put themselves on a path toward platinum-level sales in the United States. The critical establishment had decided what they were. The record-buying public had reached a different conclusion entirely, and they had done it without any help from the people whose job it was to tell them what to listen to. Were the critics eventually going to acknowledge what 75 million people were apparently already hearing? Or would the establishment that had been wrong about Black Sabbath from the very beginning simply stay wrong? They stayed wrong for a long time. The critical consensus on Black Sabbath held across most of their active career. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which could have inducted Black Sabbath in the 1990s, waited until 2006, 11 years after they first became eligible. The Recording Academy gave them the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019, 49 years after the debut. The audience had known from the beginning. 75 million albums worldwide. Paranoid became their first UK number 1 and went multi-platinum worldwide, eventually becoming Black Sabbath's best-selling album. Rob Halford, the vocalist of Judas Priest, a band that extended the form Sabbath had built, said it in the plainest possible terms. There is no doubt in my mind that Sabbath invented what we know as the start of true and pure heavy metal. Not every down-tuned guitar or tritone riff begins with Tony Iommi, but a huge line of heavy music runs directly through what he had to build after that accident. The lighter strings, the altered technique, the darker voicings, the physical economy of those riffs, and the refusal to let 2 missing fingertips end the career. The doctor was not wrong about the fingers. He was wrong about what they would build. Tony Iommi went home with 2 missing fingertips, a recording of Django Reinhardt, and a leather jacket he no longer had use for as a jacket. What he made out of those 3 things turned out to be an entire genre.